Hey everyone, welcome to the Set of Bounce. Today we're going to be talking about the Sydney Swans, how they went in 2022, talking about all of their performances, some of the great things that we saw, their list changes, and some predictions for next year. Big J, here we are talking about the team that made it to the grand final and then absolutely shat the bed. What did you make of the Sydney Swans this year?
Um, it's interesting, kind of the position that the team's in, where I think it's kind of a lot of their younger players have really come into fruition a little bit. So, like we'll talk about Golden and Warner, those kind of players. I know that McDonald had a little bit more influence with Buddy being out. And then obviously Buddy's, 1000th goal was really influential as well. So Swans this year did really well. I wouldn't have picked them to come as high in the draft, like as high on the ladder as what they did. But, I'm pretty happy with if you're a Swan supporter, you'd be pretty happy. How about yourself?
Yeah, they were an interesting one. Like you say, I don't think there were too many people that really forecasted for them to finish as high as they did. I guess, when we speak about how high they did, as high as third on the ladder, that really came out of the blue to me, I think. We all know that Sydney is a developing list with a lot of great young talent in there. It was a bit surprising for it. And we know they're talented, but for them to gel and for them to click this quickly was very impressive. And I don't think we should be too surprised when you look at what sort of great coaching they have and a lot of those champion Sydney Swans players that we've come to know and really appreciate over the years, like Kennedy and Parker. They're still around and they're still driving those standards. I think what was the biggest thing that surprised you with these guys?
I guess kind of how well the team did without Kennedy in the side. Obviously, he spent some time out with injury, and in the past, he's kind of been that maybe not pillar, but that kind of that really strong point in the midfield where when times were down, you can use his leadership, that kind of thing, to bring them back up. So having games where he wasn't playing, other players being able to step up really helped with them too. The likes of Mills and Parker getting better and better as well. Obviously, for Supercoach wise, Parker was really good. Those guys getting better. And then kind of how well the likes of Paddy McCartan did down back as well. So obviously losing Alir the year before really hurt. And they kind of felt that as well. And then having him kind of come in basically out of nowhere, revamp his career after so many injuries. That'd kind of be my big points. What about you?
Yeah, Paddy McCartan, what an amazing story that is. I'm really glad you brought him up because, for after everything that he went through, and I'm sure a lot of St Kilda fans are absolutely spewing that their prized player has now made the move to Sydney, and it might seem all a little unfair, but the option was there, I think, for St Kilda to also try and put him in a different position like the Swans have. And for him, though, like just the fairy tale of him playing alongside his brother in the back line, you could see what a great duo they were and how they really fed off each other. And it really made them a great defensive unit, especially when you play at that skinny ground there at the SCG. It's so small. They play the ground so well, and it just was a perfect environment, I think, for Paddy to come back. I think Callum Mills, yes, his continued rise, and he got his All-Australian jacket, his blazer this year for the first time, being named on the wing. I think he was also probably one of the best stories. But I think Chad Warner, I think the rise of Chad Warner has to be the number one there. Apart from, of course, Buddy's 1000th, but that's more so a personal achievement.
Yeah,
I think Chad's been a real Chad this year for him. He really has taken his game to another level. It's only his third season. Like, people don't realize this guy is so young, and yet he's talked about up there. Like, I think he will very quickly be almost a staple in all of our Supercoach teams moving forward.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. Kind of, we'll talk about who they brought in the trade period and got rid of, but Sydney's one of those weird teams where they haven't relied on trading players in like a Richmond kind of has to be successful and to be competitive. Their academies produced a lot, but just their development and their ability to actually pick up the right players through the draft as well. You know, your Chad Warners, your Goulden, those kind of players, even to a lesser extent, McDonald and a few of those other ones. They're just really good players, and they've kind of got the right mix of older people around. You know, Blakey's got Lloyd, for example, a lot of those guys. They've got the real right mix of people to help develop, but also cover the young kids if they're having issues throughout the games. It's something really, really impressive. And, you know, for a team, like I'm saying, that hasn't done a lot of trading for big players. I mean, we just saw Richmond go Halper and Taranto and spend like half their draft hand to do. Sydney, I don't think, has really done that for a while outside of obviously the Buddy Franklin trade. So for them to be as good as what they are, it's pretty amazing.
Absolutely. And I think it's also because you have something like that next rung of players that are really buying into that blood Sydney culture. And when you look at Callum Mills, this guy has got such ability and he's so talented. But we so many times saw him get taken out of the midfield and be parked behind the ball like a goalkeeper, playing that goalkeeper role. Do you just have these players play these selfless roles, I guess, for their team, just to make sure that they get over the line? And a lot of times it's required, and I think it was especially the case in this performance against Melbourne that we've got here as their best performance for the year, because this one was in that first week of the finals. And Melbourne had just come off that 10-goal demolition of Brisbane, and they were on a high. They were playing at the G at home. Win, you go to a prelim. But you see what Sydney were able to grind out that win, and it was in typical Sydney fashion. They nose to the ground. They kept fighting hard. I was really impressed with Sydney's ability to stick tough. I think the second half of that last quarter, there were no goals kicked. The last goal, I think, was kicked by Heaney, who also had a great year. I think he's also one of their stars, and we still haven't even mentioned him up until now. So, like, it just goes to show how many contributors there were on that Sydney team along the way to get to that grand final, where unfortunately it all fell apart. I think they went too far, right? They had to play too many nail-biting games to get to that point. What do you think was the reason behind that last game?
If we're talking about kind of the grand final, I think just teams, especially younger teams, really just maybe not burn out, but just the exhaustion of. I know they had a really close game the game before, that kind of thing, and teams just burn out. If they're not a full team of mature age players like a Geelong is. Obviously, they've got SDK, that kind of thing, but majority of their players are seasoned veterans who played multiple finals rounds. You know, they can recover week after week and not have a problem. Whereas when you're not relying on a Chad Warner, but when he's one of your better players, I know he dominated in the grand final and was really good, but when you've got too many of his type in there, sometimes something just doesn't work out, and then they kind of blow out the way they were. One of the things that really impressed me, I think we saw it in the Sydney Swans game that we've got listed here, was how good of the backline they have, where they don't seem to be a team. I know there's some teams that will, I think the Dogs did it a little bit, that will give up those free points. You know, they'll do rush behinds to kind of reset the board and they can kick it out again. Whereas the likes of Blakey down back really, really kind of have this notion of, hey, I won't give away the 3 points. I'll try and run it out of the back line and kind of avoid that pressure that way. And Sydney, they're really good at holding off opposition scoring. It's one of their real strengths, and it's kind of underrated a little bit or not seen as well. Obviously, we saw that with Mills going back, being as selfless as what he is. Like you say, those kind of things throughout a game, being flexible and being adaptable too, is really important.
I love that when you mentioned Blakey, because I had such a great time with the Lizard last year in Supercoach. He was a great pick. I held on to him for so long, and it was so funny. I forgot which game it was, but literally every time the ball went into the behinds, you see Blakey has appeared. You're right. He's going to take he wants to take the kick in. He was concussed. It looked like he was killed. The guy was dead set buried. They had the funeral service and everything for him. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, he's back. The ball's about and he's lifting the ball up in the air. I have it. I have returned for the kick in. It was glorious to watch. Oh, I loved that game. It was so funny. But
And
they really rely on him, I think. Yeah, go for it.
he'd be like halfway down the field as well and be like, oh shit, I've got to go take the kick in. So let's quickly run to the goal square.
He knows. I swear, players know that if you play on from a kick in, they know it's a stat. They 100% know. And he does too. And I think that we started to see a bit more usage of him coming out of the back line for the Swans this year. Lloyd's always been that seagull player for him, but you can start to see that there's starting to slowly be a shift of the guard there, having that line-breaking ability. And at times I felt like if they didn't have a guy like Blakey storming out with his speed and then hitting a pinpoint lead-up pass into the middle of the ground, it seemed like their ball movement was a bit slower. But I guess that just goes hand in hand with, as you said before, with them being a younger team. They're bound to have inconsistent performances. I mean, they lost to us, for goodness sake, and they almost lost to you guys at home. So it just goes to show that when you're a young team, it's, I guess, a bit hard to control, I suppose. And their team hasn't gotten much older either. I mean, they only picked up Aaron Francis in the trade period for free, basically. He's been in the system for 6 years. It just hasn't really fit. He hasn't been able to click, but the guy's super talented. And if there's any team that can really get the most out of him, I think it's Sydney. And I think from reports that he's training to be an intercept defender. That's his game. And it's a question though, how they're going to shape their backline, because there's a lot of defenders down there now, and I'm not sure if Aaron Francis is the best 22. Do you see him able to break into that team, or do you think he's going to have to work his way in?
Was he like a key forward at Essendon? What was kind of his position? What was he brought in from Essendon?
Yeah, we sort of stuffed around with him a bit because we brought him in primarily to be an intercept defender, but then the rise of Ridley really took away that role from him, and so we tried to experiment and try and use his capabilities forward, but I think it didn't really work the best for him. We tried his heart out, but that's just not his natural position. He is meant to be an intercept defender.
Yeah. Well, I guess kind of we've spoke about McCartan doing really well down there. They have lost the league, Alir, like we mentioned before. So I think there's probably some space for that person. I know the intercept defender role is someone who's really mobile, and teams generally like to have one or two of those players, because sometimes you'll verse teams that, just like to bomb it forward, like we spoke about with Melbourne before. You play teams that play multiple key forwards, like a Carlton, where a key defender probably might not be the right move for them, whereas an intercept defender might be. If you kick it to your key forward is kind of your game plan. That's kind of where the difference might be beneficial. So I guess it's kind of just a wait and see. They haven't lost anyone really in that back line, but he can always just play off the bench. Paddy McCartan has to rest or maybe move a little bit further up the ground. Francis could come in and play off the bench that way.
Yeah, and I think he also can play a bit of that swingman role. I think a lot of teams, especially high up on the ladder, have a player that they're able to swing forward or send them back just to change the dynamic and the look of the game if things aren't going 100% their way. So he could play as that. I mean, we trialed him as a forward, and he was respectable as a forward, and you don't have to be a gun, I don't think, to play, as long as you're able to bring the ball to ground, to the likes of Papley, for example, who is one of the most dangerous small forwards in the game. And when you look at the players that they've lost, Kennedy retired, massive respect to him. What a sensational career he's had and a great leader. Sinclair's retired, O'Riordan's retired as well. So these guys, I think O'Riordan's probably the one that's probably left a bit earlier than what he could have kept going. But Sinclair and Kennedy have given their all, and then they had a few delistings, and every team you have to have some delistings every year, especially if you're going to bring in new talent. And the Swans are always bringing in good new talent, aren't they? Do you reckon there were any players here that were a bit stiff to miss out on a new contract?
Speaking on O'Riordan, it's probably really tough being from overseas and then not seeing your family for a few years just from COVID as well, not being able to go home, that kind of thing. That appeal, especially these Irish guys, I know they're very family orientated. They'll go home during the breaks. So maybe that kind of retirement has hit home a little bit that way. Sinclair's probably at his time. Same with Naismith. I think going forward, one of the really big holes at the Swans is that tall ruckman, and having someone develop coming in who's kind of that younger guy taking the spot, because Hickey's not a spring chicken, right? He's not like he's mid-20s doing really well. He's probably coming to the close to his end of his career as well. So I think that's probably a big hole that a lot of these ruckmen who, to a certain extent were guys that they tried on. So guys that they had brought in from other clubs or were always kind of your pick and super coach that, if they're fit, then they can be super cheap and they'll be really good because they'll be the number one ruck. So I think kind of just natural progressions, just like, my body can't be right. I'm going to retire that way. James Bell probably is the one out of all of them that is the delisting. That's probably the roughest one, if you had to ask. I remember he played a few games during the season and things like that. Maybe not best 22, but definitely a fringe player who could come in. And everyone remembers Ben Bronk's, interview with the Snags. That was good when he came on. I think he kicked like 7 or something. If Aaron Francis is going to be kind of that swingman for Sydney, one of the things with Sydney is they've always been very progressive with their positioning on field and picking up players and kind of identifying where the game's going. So Francis can be kind of that swingman who can play intercept defender, but also key forward type position for them. It feels like very Dan McStay. Josh Walker kind of did it a little bit, but kind of that player who's really, really valuable for a team on field. Maybe someone for injuries, but also just kind of rotations, a la Dan McStay. Aaron Francis could be that guy for them as well. He's fairly tall as well, isn't he?
Yeah, he's like roughly 190 centimeters, so he's got the size to play both sides without sacrificing that agility as well. So he can definitely be a threat in the air and on the ground. So I think it's a very good pickup, and I think he can play that swingman role well for them. Exactly like you said. I don't think you can be too tall and be successful in that role, because you start to sacrifice your ground level speed. And so, Aaron Francis has got that in spades. Okay, cool. So I guess we can then move on, I suppose.
If we just quickly go back to the delistings for a sec.
Sure.
If you look at all the players that are there, you really kind of notice the age profile. So Naismith is fairly old. Kennedy's fairly old. Sinclair's fairly old. This is a team that is very dominant now and has just delisted a lot of older people who weren't maybe best 22. So their team is going to be even stronger. I know non-Victorian clubs, there's a lot of bias there because we just don't talk about them very much. But Sydney is going to be even better with obviously the kids they brought in, we'll have a look at. But just kind of overall, hey, we got rid of a bunch of 30-year-olds, and now we've brought in people who are going to be dominating for us. So it's not like there's any slowing down with kind of their ladder progression.
No. They were the seventh oldest side in the competition this year, in 2022, and they're definitely bound to get younger now that they've with these retirements and these delistings, and Aaron Francis isn't old either. So they're going to get younger, and you're going to have just a list full of these similar age, highly talented players. So it would be amazing to be a Sydney Swans supporter, especially when you look at now these other youngsters that they've added to the team. They
Mhm.
added Jacob Constanti, who's a forward mid with pick 20. They added Cooper Vickery, who's a small defender / winger with pick 27. And they added Caleb Mitchell, a winger, with pick 40. Now, Jacob Constanti, you can tell in the picture, he has that tongue out. His personality. This guy, he loves to get in your face. He talks the talk. He's good. He's able to get under your skin, and he can also back it up though, because this guy, when he's chasing you down and he tries to tackle you, it sticks. Those tackles stick, and he's quite agile. He's really good at evading tackles and being able to hit the scoreboard. He is a great partner in crime for Papley. They're both chirpy. You see Papley out there on the field. He likes to have that swagger. He loves a goal. And this guy Jacob Constanti, they're going to be a smashing duo up forward for the Swans in the forward line for years to come. Do you know much about Cooper Vickery?
So seems to be like a small defender winger. Obviously, we've written that down there. Something that probably a lot of teams now are bringing in those type of players. I know North's kind of trialing Blake Drury down back, kind of that Caleb Daniels style player who can hit up targets along the field, but also run quite a lot as well. It's a position, like we were saying before with Francis, where Sydney's kind of identified, hey, this might be the spot for us as well. So maybe not AFL ready straight away just because of size-wise, but when he comes in, he'll do really well for them. I'm fair to say that like the likes of Jake Lloyd are slowing down a little bit, so putting a bit more pace and speed into that, that back six kind of wing area would be really good for them as well. I know they've struggled a little bit with wingers, your Dylan Stevens, that kind of thing. And we've seen that with Caleb Mitchell coming in now as well. So it's definitely a position of need, and now they've brought in 2 rookies to kind of fill that spot. Caleb Mitchell, really good runner.
That's right.
Yeah, really good
That's right.
runner. Great outside run, that kind of thing. So, yeah, doing quite well.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that Caleb Mitchell also brings to the table is he's got pretty good core body strength. So he's able to leap, but also maintain his form. So he's great at taking good overhead marks, which I think in a lot of circumstances is really important for a winger.
Yeah.
He's 186 centimeters. So he's got, he's not the tallest, but he's got a decent height, and with decent aerial ability. That just means that, he's really serviceable for a bailout kick, for example, or you're trying to switch the play, or you're trying to get over a zone. Having someone that can mark on the wing is really important. And really useful. The only problem then is his kicking is a bit sus still. He has to work on his kicking, and he's not the fastest player either. So he really does need to work on that kicking, especially so that he can really break into that Sydney side. But in terms of ability, he's definitely got it, playing for Vic Country this year. One that I think a lot of Sydney fans and recruiters is, really happy about as well is Will Edwards, that Category B rookie that's there. He was developing in the Swans Academy, and he's really come on this year. He's 20 years old, so people would consider that to be, a real mature age player. But for him, he's come on now, and he's got great size. But despite that, he's thriving in one-on-one contests in the back line, and he's really quick. He got the 20 meters. He finished 20 meters in like under 3 seconds, like 2.8 seconds or something, which is really impressive for someone who plays key defender. And the academy, while he was playing, they trialed him up forward as well, so he can also play as that swing man as well. So they picked up Aaron Francis, but they've also got Edwards, a 20-year-old. So it's a sort of they've got they're putting pressure on the list. That's for sure. Aaron Francis can't expect to just waltz into Sydney and get game time. He's got to break into that team, and then he's going to be competing against the likes of Will Edwards as well. So I think a lot of Sydney fans will be really excited to see this guy moving forward. Do we know much about the rookies, Big J?
So Magor's an X-Factor player who had a 41 disposal game. So really, really strong there. Kind of breakout. I think he probably does a bit of midfield as well, which kind of adds a little bit more of a dynamic to the Swans. Warner seems to be very impactful. Same with the likes of Goulden and Parker, but they haven't really had anyone who's a big accumulator running through there. So kind of having that type of player would help quite a lot for them. Picking him up as a rookie as well, kind of like, might be the steal of the draft in a couple of years. We'll see what happens there. And then Owen as well. So they picked up Owen from Tasmania. Bit of a ruck forward who might take a little bit of extra time to get into the system. But as we've kind of identified with Buddy being a bit older, Hickey being a bit older in that position, there's definitely some competition and some space there for an emerging player to come in as well. So, I think Sydney, there's no pressure for a lot of these kids to play straight away just with how good they are. So picking up kind of these developmental players who might take a little bit longer in the state leagues to develop, they can do that without much worry. So picking up for kind of the future, which is something Sydney's been really good at. As well, kind of having Will Edwards there as well. We've spoken about them not having to trade in players. Will Edwards is another example of that too, just kind of how good he is, and they've got him for free. And he's not even on the main list, being Category B. So come on, Sydney Academy, something's got to change there, right?
They are too good. They have owned this system for so many years, man. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, and they're preparing for the future when much of their list is already so young. Like it is, they can 100% afford to take their time with these project players because there's absolutely no rush. There's no deadline. They can develop in the twos, and they'll be able to crack into the team eventually down the track when they're good enough. So, yeah, the Swans, they are a quality outfit. They really are a very well-run organization. They're up there with like the Geelongs of the competition. Yeah. You gotta, and that's why everybody respects them so much, right? It's not just they used to be South Melbourne, but yeah, South Melbourne. But you talk about them with a pride. You know what I mean? That this is such a well-oiled machine, I suppose.
Horse and Co. definitely have done. They've done a lot with that club. And they're definitely setting him up for the future. Potentially he could leave, half the staff could leave, and they'd still be in a really competitive team. Look at many more other people in the AFL and probably couldn't say the same thing. So congrats to them with how well they're doing.
Exactly. And speaking of setting them up for the future that the very near foreseeable future that we're talking about here is 2023, and how high we have them finishing. We reckon 16 wins and finishing in the top 4. Anything less should be a disappointment for this team. Do you reckon?
So, Buddy's getting a little bit older, which may hurt them a bit. I don't know if they've really got like a really good key forward to kind of come in and help him that way. McDonald is getting better, but he's like third year really in the AFL. The first one doesn't count too much. So. Outside of that, definitely 16 wins. The team's getting better. Just like the structure and learning about the things, as we'll cover with the point number 1 in the key factors. Just kind of the age profile of the team. Another year of preseason in a lot of these kids, building that consistency. Definitely, I can definitely see them being around that 16 mark this year. If that makes them top 4, just kind of depending on if there's a real blowouts in the AFL. Definitely for them right there. What do you reckon, Joe?
Yeah, I'm not as bullish. For me, when we're talking about a team that is so young and so inconsistent, it can be really difficult to stay really high, especially after that sort of a performance in the grand final. I feel like in the grand final, when you're on the, when you've received such a shellacking that the game is basically overcome quarter time, it can. I feel like it can only take you in one or two ways. Either you really bottom out, you sort of you haven't had that time, I suppose, to hit the ground running a bit earlier. You're very fatigued. You're very tired. You're pretty depressed on how it all ended, and you sort of enter the preseason a bit slow, which can affect the rest of your season.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could really motivate you to push you to go even higher and even further. So obviously, only time will tell. If it's the first one, then yes, I definitely see him finishing top four still, and really pushing, I suppose, ahead and trying to knuckle down on maybe some more defensive up the ground. Having their forwards play a bit more defensively could definitely help them go a long way, I think. But if it's the first option where they really, are depressed, then we could see another team really fall down the ladder after making a grand final, like we've seen so often in this modern era. But I do think, though, that Warner and Goulden continue their rise. That, I think, is without a shadow of doubt going to happen. You can tell these guys are really driven, really high standards, and you can just see that the sky is the limit, especially for a guy like Warner. You can see the sky is the limit. Do you have any doubt that these guys are going to continue their rise?
Well, we don't even know what Warner's ceiling is. If we think from Supercoach, kind of, he's had some monster scores and some monster kind of amount of disposals, that kind of thing. We saw him dominate kind of the grand final as well. So I don't even know what this kid's ceiling is. It's really kind of just about him bringing his worst games up to that level a little bit more, like it is for everyone who's developing. But there's no one really at Sydney who's going to take the ball away from him either. So the opportunity's there. Seems like a really driven kid. Definitely, I think that's the way to go for them.
Cool, not a problem. And with Blakey, I love my the lizard goat. He is a legend. I love him. The way he runs, I'll never forget that video of the lizard and him running side by side. It really is the perfect nickname for this guy. Does he continue to adopt more responsibility over Lloyd? I think he does. Clearly, the club is not afraid, I think, to embrace that there is a changing of the guard. We started to see a lot more Kennedy playing off the bench, despite him being a champion of the team. Now he's gone. We start to see, the likes of, like we've been saying, all of this selflessness. I can see also that Lloyd will continue to adopt less responsibility and entrust more to Blakey, who has that leg speed to break the lines. And there were rumors that Lloyd might end up moving to Gold Coast. And if that ended up happening, then 100% Blakey was going to be in my Supercoach team this year, without a shadow of a doubt. But I do think that Blakey continues to take more kick-ins and gets more involved in the plays. So I think we're going to be seeing another exciting brand of football coming from Sydney this year, finishing in the top four, hopefully. And, one can only wait and see, I guess, when the season hits and in the preseason games. So I guess that brings our discussion of the Sydney Swans to a close. Thanks a lot, Big J, for doing this video with us here. And I think it was a great chat. I think there's a lot to be excited for the Swans. Do you got any final thoughts before we go away?
If I was a Swan fan, I'd be really, really excited with kind of the projection and the progression of the team. And buy your memberships now, because you're going to be attending most home games and probably a lot of interstate games too, just with how good they are. You're not going to have a bad day out watching Sydney.
Yeah, correct. 100%. Like, even some of the losses I think they had could have very easily have won. So please, guys, stay tuned to the Centre Bounce. We've got still more of the team reviews coming, as well as more Supercoach content as well. So don't forget to like, subscribe, tell your friends if they want to talk football, because that's what we are. We're a football channel, and we look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.